Hi, I'm Jo Avery. I'm a quilt designer and teacher from Edinburgh, and I'm going to be talking about foundation paper piecing today, and also a little bit more applique. So we're going to be working on this block here, which is the heart and arrows. It's going to have another heart this side, which I haven't done yet. Prepared this one ahead, and I've also prepared half of the next one. So all we're going to do is we're going to make this side here. And I'm just going to do a little bit of foundation paper piecing technique because I think there's already other videos on this. But what really confuses my students is the starting off, how you start off, which bit of the paper do you do it, where does the fabric go. So I'm just going to try and take you through how I teach them what I think is a logical way of thinking about it. So you've got this printed bit of paper, which you've hopefully printed at actual size from your template, because that's really important. And it's printed on one side and it's plain on the other side. Well, the reason it's printed on this side is because you're going to sew on top of the line. So therefore, you can't put the fabric on top of this side. You've got to put the fabric on that side. So that's the first thing sorted out. The fabric's got to go on this side. So I've just trimmed this piece of fabric that we're going to use to cover the A1 section of the template down a little bit, so it's a bit more manageable. So you can see if I turn it over, it's definitely going to be big enough to cover A1 with 1/4 inch all the way around. And then we're going to get the piece that's going to be up next, which is to cover A2, and we're going to put that right sides together next to the seam, lining up the seam that we're going to sew next. So if we just turn it back over, we can see the seam that we're going to sew next is between A1 and A2. So, just so you understand, you don't need to sew that first bit down on its own. That only gets fixed down when you put the next bit that's going to cover the next numbered section down. So you can flip it around a few times till you're absolutely sure. I'm quite happy with that. You can put a pin in if you want, and you can just make sure that if you turn that over there, it's definitely going to cover. I'm just going to move it, I'm just going to center it slightly as well, so that it's definitely got about the same amount either side on the length. And I would always say with foundation paper piecing, waste fabric, not time. So if you've got a piece and you think, I think that'll just make it. If it doesn't, it's a real pain to have to unpick it. So just go, no, I'll just cut a bigger piece that I'm not too worried about, because we've all got more fabric we can use. So now I'm going to turn that back over. And if I wanted to, I could put a pin in, but also I can just have a look underneath here and just check that that's all fine. And we're going to start to sew. So we're going to start to sew, and this machine has got like an automatic little locking thing, so it's giving a few stitches backwards and forwards to make sure that the seam's going to be secure. And the other thing is that I have made the stitch length smaller. So this is sewing at a 1.5 size of stitch, which means it's going to be a lot easier to tear the paper away afterwards. And when I get to the end, I'm just going to do a little reverse so that I can secure that end as well. And then none of our stitches are going to come undone. And just cut that off there. And we'll fold this over here, and that's covered A1 and A2, and with a little extra. We're not going to need it. You always give yourself a little bit of extra leeway, so we're going to trim it later. So then I'm just going to press that. You can just finger press, but it is better if you press it properly. It does keep things straighter. So the next thing is we're going to see, what are we going to be doing next? We're going to be covering A3 and A4. And what I want to do now is I want to trim these bits here, so I've got something to put the next bit of fabric to. So I'll turn it over, and I'm going to use a card and an 1/4 ruler. Now you can use any ruler for this. You could easily just use a normal ruler and just use your 1/4 inch mark on a ruler, but these 1/4 rulers have been specially designed for foundation paper piecing, and they've got a little bit of a ridge on them. So what we need to do now is we need to trim between the A1 and A2 and the A3 bit. So we're going to turn that back there on the line between them. So we put our card on the line, you fold it back, and then you get the ridge of this 1/4 ruler, and it sits nicely there. You don't have to worry about it moving by the time you get your rotary cutter out, and then we'll just trim that away. And then we'll do the same the other side, because we might as well do it while we're here. because the A3 and A4 bits are going on. It's not like we're going to put the A3 bit on and then put another bit on. They're going on independently. So we'll do the same thing here. We're going to get a card. I'm going to fold that back. Going to get our add a quarter ruler, and we're going to give ourselves a nice edge there. And foundation paper piecing is very messy because you get all these little bits. If I'm doing a whole quilt on foundation paper piecing, I tend to keep the Hoover in my sewing room. Otherwise, it just gets out of control. So now we've got some smaller bits of fabric here that I've cut earlier, and these pieces should cover all of this. We've got to make sure, in fact, I think it needs to go this way. And what I'm doing is I'm just checking that by turning it over before I sew it, I can check it's going to cover all that, especially because that's on a bit of an angle. So for instance, you could think that by putting it on here, it was going to be okay, and it just might not be. So we'll just make sure we've got everything we need there. Once I'm happy with that, it's lined up next to that cut edge, and we've got right sides together. We can turn it over and we can sew that line here. Okay, down, a little bit of a locking stitch there, and then when we get to the other end, just a little seam. I'm going to do a little reverse, and then we can press that. And now the only bit we really need to trim here, because we can trim everything else at the end, is just this bit here. So I'm going to turn this over, get my card again, and fold this over on this long line here. And in fact, at this point now, we can get rid of all of this. This was left over from putting our first bit on. We didn't have a nice 1/4 inch seam really there because we just made sure that we could cover all of A1. So now I can trim all of that. And if you wanted to, you could actually leave this bit until you put the other bit on. I've just done that now. It's good to have a couple of practices at this. And I've got another piece here ready to go. It's a bit bigger. That's okay. If I was doing a lot of things like this and I was going to be using the same fabric throughout, I'd cut some strips and I'd just keep using those strips up. Okay. And a little bit of a seam here. Okay, and we'll press that. And then I'll trim that away. Because there's quite a lot here, I'm just going to roughly trim that. I'll trim it properly later. And the important bit is the line between the A1, 2s, 3s, 4s and everything, and the last piece, which is going to be the A5. So we're just going to carry on this bit here. There we go. I need a new blade, I think. And we've got our last piece to put on now, which is I've cut something that's definitely going to be big enough already. I know that's going to work fine. So we'll do this last seam. We'll press it. And then lastly, what we'll do is, or what you will do at home, is you'll get your ruler and you'll trim that perfectly so that it looks like this. So once you've trimmed your two pieces, or your one piece, I've already got one ahead here, so we've just done A, but before that I'd done B. So you need these two pieces and we're going to put them together. So we're not going to take the papers off until we've sewn these together. And this is going to help us get this more perfectly, more accurately. So what we want to do is we want to put them right sides together, and we're going to use a pin to make sure these points are matched up before we start to sew them. So I'm putting a pin through the absolute point there, and I'm going to get it through the same point here. There we go. Keep that nice and flat, and I can do the same with the other side as well. So I can put a point through, pin through that point, and then find the corresponding place on the other template underneath. Okay, that should be fine. So then what I tend to do, once I'm happy with that, is I use these binding clips to keep it together. Okay, without disturbing it. And now we're going to start to sew all of this seam. We're sewing along this line between the edge of our template. I'm going to just reverse the other end as well and cut that off. And hopefully, yeah, that's worked out well and our points are all in the right place. And that's going to be a lovely block. So then all you're going to do is you're going to tear all these away. You can fold them first or tear them. And I actually quite like the tearing bit. Some people really hate it. It's the sort of thing, if you had lots to do, you can save them all up and sit in front of the TV and do it. You might annoy your husband a bit, but it is possible to do. So I'm going to leave that now. And we're going to look at the block that we did earlier, and I'm just going to show you one other way of preparing applique. So in previous videos for the flower pot and for the doves, we went through various other ways that you could prepare your applique pieces prior to sewing them down, and also we looked at the stitching, the actual stitch you use. So with this one we're going to try something a bit different for this quite awkward heart shape, and that is to use interfacing. So what I've got here is I've got the actual pattern here, and I've got a piece of iron-on interfacing, and it's nice and easy to see through, and I'm going to put it on top here, and I'm going to grab my pen and I'm just going to trace it, the inner line. So this is the exact line I'm going to use. There we go. And then I'm going to, in fact, here's one I prepared earlier. I'm going to cut it out. So first of all, we cut out this interfacing. I've used a friction pen there just to do the tracing. So by the time I press it in a minute, all those marks should go away. So once you've done that, then you're going to get a little bit of fabric and shiny side down onto the wrong side of your fabric. You're going to press it like I've done there. So just to show you though, what I would tend to do with interfacing, especially a little bit like this, is to turn it over and press it from the fabric side, because then you're not going to risk melting the very delicate interfacing. So you just want to do that until it's done. I didn't cut that out quite as well as I did this one, so we're going to use this one. So then once you've done that, what you need to do is cut all the way around, giving yourself your seam allowance, which is going to be the very scant 1/4 inch. We don't want it to be too big a seam because it's a really small little template here with all these quite tight curves, and you're going to make it harder for yourself if you have too big a seam. Now what this does is it gives us something to fold our edges over to. So we're going to pop this about here, and if you want you can actually fold that over to start with, just so I can see where it sits, because I want it to be in line with that. So that's where the point's going to be, so that looks about right. I'm going to go back to my applique pins, stick those on, one of those, and I have a needle already threaded with, I'm going to put a couple in, just sometimes with one it can swivel a little bit. Put that out the way. And we'll start to sew. I'm just going to show you a little bit of this. We can hopefully do it quite quickly. We're going to start sewing, knotting our thread with a few stitches just underneath where we're about to sew, or you can do it from the back, but I'm just doing it underneath. Going to pick up the stitch from here, catching the edge. Now, if you remember, if you saw the other one, we talked about the edges here, this point that we're going to be dealing with. I want to deal with this, at least 1/2 inch before, so I'm going to fold this the other way now. We're going to fold it that way, fold it back that way so that my dog ear is safely on that side. And if you sew too close to the point before you do this, you won't be able to do it. So you'll have to take a few stitches out. So now we can roll this under, as we looked at before. Roll it, fold it under. It's nicely secure under there, and then we'll do some stitches to make sure. Pulling them nice and tight, just push it under a little bit more there. Again, you want to make sure your stitches aren't loose. You don't want them to be puckered, but you don't want them to be loose because you'll see loose stitches. So I always try to make sure I see a little bit of a dimple, and then it can relax again after that. So I'm going to quite speedily sew around that. You can see how nicely it is to press this edge in because it's got the interfacing. It's not, you can really get the nice shape, hopefully, of the heart. There we go. You can feel where the interfacing is there. And if you find that's not working particularly well, what you could do is you could actually press 2 pieces of interfacing on top, and that's going to give you even more. Or you can try using this is quite a lightweight interfacing, you can try using a heavier one. So I'm going to go around and show you what you do at this bit here and how to deal with the curves on the... This is nice and easy. Nice gentle curve here, but we're coming up to these really quite extreme curves. And I did find it a little bit fiddly when I was doing it on the other side. So once we start to get to these curves, we're having to take smaller bits of seam to fold under, and we're going to start to make smaller stitches as we go. So a little bit at a time, using my needle to turn under a little bit as we go. And it's all about patience with curves. Go slowly, stitches a little bit closer together. And we're nearly getting up to the point of the space between the 2 curves, and that is a concave bit. So we're not be able to turn under here without giving that a little snip into the seam allowance. So I'm just going to do one snip that's taking me pretty much all of the seam allowance. And now I can actually fold that right under there, and I've got to very gently go around this bit of curve. This is probably the hardest bit because you can see how it wants to sort of make a fold. So I have to be it's quite fiddly. Maybe takes a little while to get that. I'm sort of pushing it in, and then I'm using my needle to pull it back out again, pushing it in a little bit here because I want to get that nice curve. And even though we've got that interfacing underneath to help us, still need some careful treatment here. This is probably out of all the pieces I've been showing you, this is probably the trickiest. So I can pull that out a little bit more there so it doesn't just have a straight edge, it's got more of a curve. And if you remember what we did before when we were doing the other concave bits, is we did swooping. So we swoop under here to get rid of all of the raw edges as we take it up to this V shape. And we're going to swoop again because I want to really make sure that V shape exists. And I'm pretty much at the V shape now, so I'm just going to slightly bring my needle down a little bit there just to make sure I get that shape. And then I'm just going to go around the other way just the same way. But hopefully if you take your time, small stitches, little folds, a little bit at a time, you'll get that nice curve. Then you can finish that block.